Anybody there? Hi. Hello, Julian.
Oh, hi everyone.
Hi, Pam. Hi, Rabbi.
Strange. 1 second.
Who's that?
Mark.
Mark. Hi, Mark.
Morning.
Oh, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, morning.
Morning.
Suddenly, like, I was in the room
Morning,
and no one was
everybody.
there, and then suddenly everyone's there.
Well, I've been on since 9:20, and then suddenly a couple of minutes ago it said the host has left the meeting,
Very strange.
and I had
No,
to start
that-
again.
Rabbi,
Okay, we'll start in a moment. Okay, 1 second.
Rabbi, would you prefer
Hello?
to start at 9:30 generally at the moment?
Can we make that a bigger thing? I think so. Sorry?
I said, would you prefer to start at 9:30 on a Monday at the moment,
Every week.
each week?
Yeah, if you don't mind, can we make that the regular time?
Yeah, it's fine with us.
Just
Yeah.
gives me time usually to prepare the shiur and have breakfast. Okay. Right. So let me just start the Facebook link. Everyone gets to see Julian eating breakfast.
What have you got? Cornflakes?
Bran flakes.
Bran flakes.
Bran
flakes.
Oh, good
And,
boy.
Which is fine.
and blueberries and yogurt.
Oh, good boy.
No, that's what I've got as well.
Oh, that's what you've got as well,
I've got
both
the
of you.
yogurt, yeah.
Very
I just
good.
wanted to do a bit of gardening between the between Chakarith and this.
Right. I'm afraid I had Frosties and milk.
Right.
A large bowl.
Were they low sugar frosties?
No,
No.
I don't believe in these low sugar things. Too many chemicals.
Don't know.
Have the proper stuff.
Okay, I'm just doing the Facebook link and then we'll start.
How many look at it on Facebook, Rabbi?
Well, I don't know. Usually get 1 or 2 at a time, and then afterwards it says 150 people saw your thing, which I never quite believe. But I think it's like, you know, people who get it pop up on their feed automatically kind of thing. So I'm not sure.
I think they just click on and look at it and then click off again.
Well, that's it. A lot of people have videos that come on automatically, which is always interesting. Okay, just a minute. Oh, it's closing on my app, so hopefully it'll run a bit quicker. Right. Got it to work for Tanya yesterday, not quite sure how. It's an old computer, doesn't do modern stuff. Right, okay. Anyone know where we were up to, by the way? Anybody know where we're up to?
You're talking about Marisayan and talking about
Right, okay. Okay, we're about to...
of cleaning and
Yes.
bleaching
Yeah,
and not judging others.
and you couldn't squeeze
Right.
out
Hey.
wet rag, squeezing out water.
Right, so it's about... Yes.
Oh yeah.
So we're going to talk about some practical examples of that, I think, in a minute. Oh yeah, so we started to say that there is also the issue of, there's several issues. There's dosh, which is threshing, which leads to squeezing. And then there's the issue of whitening and bleaching things, which is also malacha, or coloring, dyeing things, which is a separate issue that we'll talk about in due course. Okay. So on Facebook with complete with breakfast, and then so we're going to talk about a few more practical examples as well here. Right, here we go. Okay, I'll start talking while it's doing it. Can everyone still hear me? Okay.
Yep.
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 No, you hear me? Okay. All right. Okay. Thought I went off. Okay, just. We're about to go on Facebook. Okay. So things that you would therefore need to be careful about are when you have a spill on your tablecloth. you
I'm
don't
silent.
have a rag handy, right? You've spilled, I don't know, you spilled some thick tomato soup or something, and you want to scrape it off the tablecloth. So you use a spoon or a knife to scrape it. What would the tin be there? So again, you have to be very careful you don't actually crush it or squeeze it. Going on Facebook now. You're about to be famous. That's something you have to be careful about. So what should you do? You should just basically, in a situation like that, where you're trying to remove some kind of substance, you don't want to basically press it, because that's
Can't hear him.
pressing.
Rabbi,
So, for
we-
example, let's
we-
say you do it very
Rabbi,
gently, basically, so you don't squeeze it. There's a separate
we lost most of that.
issue of if you put a liquid on it, that yeah,
Okay.
You keep stopping and
Losing me.
starting, Rabbi.
oh gosh, okay, 1 second. Is that better? Oh, what just happened
Yeah,
there?
we just missed a lot of what you said.
Okay, I'll try again. Right. So, so say you spilled something thick on your table. I don't know. You've got a thick tomato soup or something you're having, right? Or I don't know, ratatouille or something like that, and you've spilled it on your white tablecloth, right? And you want to clean it up on Shabbos. So there's a few issues. One is you don't want to be squeezing, even though you don't want the liquid. Nonetheless, you don't want to be squeezing all those vegetables. So if you, for example, took a knife and scraped it all onto a plate, you have to be careful not to press on it. If you took a cloth to clean it up, you have to be careful that there isn't sufficient liquid in there that you're going to end up squeezing the cloth out. And then you've got another problem. If you apply liquid to your tablecloth, you might be laundering it. So basically, don't spill things.
Tell that to the children.
Yeah, the adults are quite capable as well.
Oh, yes.
Usually by $1, we say, oh, the cloth stayed clean because we've had a plastic on. Oh, good, we can use it next week. And then I end up spilling grape juice on it at $1 time, almost without fail. So, yeah. Similarly, if you are, say you're washing a baby, you have to put some baby oil on. You're using flannel or something, or a wipe even, or anything like that. Have to be careful not to squeeze it out. So baby wipes are an interesting thing. Huggies are quite moist. They're probably too moist. You take them out of the packet and you can feel, very clever how they do it. I don't know how they do it, but you can feel the moisture on them. Other brands, the sensitive ones, are not as moist. So I don't know if you recall, we said last week that the rule of thumb was something that has enough moisture on it that will basically drip off it is a problem. So for example, I don't know, let's say you, I don't know, you know that you're going to need to, I don't know, you've got some need for some cleansing of some kind. So you take a flannel before Shabbos and you put some warm water on it and you squeeze it out before Shabbos, so it's just slightly damp, not damp enough to actually emit any moisture. So that would be permitted for use on Shabbos. So I think I mentioned last week, let's say you've got your mop that you used Erev Shabbos and it's almost dry, just got a little bit of liquid left on it, but it's not very wet and it wouldn't, like if you squeezed it, it wouldn't come out. It's literally just moist. So you could use that to mop the floor on Shabbos. What you can't do is apply enough liquid that you might squeeze it out, right? So baby wipes are an interesting thing, and I suspect a lot of us are not as careful as we should be. Really what one should do is make sure to, or any kind of wipe, I don't know, moisturizing or cleansing wipes, or, you know, any kind of wipe that you use, but I'm thinking of baby wipes. If they're too moist, it's a problem. If you take them out of the packet and they're dripping wet, it's a problem because you're going to end up squeezing out the moisture. So the best thing probably is to use, like I said, the sensitive ones are a bit thicker and have less moisture, or alternatively, leave the packet open for a little bit so they dry out slightly before Shabbos. These are things to be aware of, though. It's problematic.
Sainsbury's little ones are not drippy.
Right, so they would be good, basically. Because otherwise you're squeezing out the moisture. It's very simple, which you're not allowed to on Shabbos. Okay. What about hair? I think we may have touched on this.
Yeah.
You can't squeeze your hair, so you have to be very careful when you dry your hair that you don't basically squeeze the water out of it, right? If you've got long hair, you kind of squeeze it with a towel, don't you, to get the water out, yes?
But you can't wash it on Shabbos anyway.
No, but let's say, I don't know, it got wet, you're in the rain, or you had to go to mikveh, which is allowed on Friday night, or you're in the rain somewhere, right? Or someone spilled something, or it's your beard, I don't know, you've got moisture in your beard. So whatever the situation is, so be particularly careful about squeezing out hair, which is one reason not to wash oneself on Shabbos. You have to be careful in general if a person, for any reason, going to mikveh is the obvious one. If you have to dry your hair for any reason, the preferred method that most people will use, and I assume that ladies use if they go to mikveh on a Friday night, is to pat it very gently rather than to sort of rub it vigorously with a towel. Because the other problem is you can't pull hairs out on Shabbos. Because we said previously you can't detach something that's growing, right? That's a malacha. So you can't pull hairs out on Shabbos. So if you use a rough towel, you can easily pull hair out as well. So basically, if you have to dry hair, or your dog, or your cat, or your baby's child's hair, look, what happens when your child gets, you know, sticky stuff in their hair and you have to somehow wash it out on Shabbos? You know, you've got to do it. First of all, you have to use cold water. They're going to love that. And second, you have to be very careful when you're drying it, basically. Okay, it says that you can't squeeze honeycomb either. Do people squeeze honeycomb? I think that's what that is. To get the honey out? Or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't mean honeycomb. Maybe it means something else. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Maybe it's not that. It's something to do with honey. I'm not sure what that is. Okay, what about milking? Right, you squeeze the cow's udders to get the milk out. Morning, Jeff. Right, when you milk a cow, you're squeezing the udders to get the milk out. Is that allowed? So it comes under the malacha, the heading of dosh, of threshing, but it's a very, very big subject.
Is it not that you have to do it because of the comfort of the
right?
The
So that's
animal?
where the question comes in. The question comes in that it would be cruel to leave a cow unmilked if it doesn't have calves for 24 hours. So one would have to look into that. It's not an automatic no. I don't know exactly what they do in milk parlors. I think they have automatic milking machines. Okay. Similarly, if a woman has to express, I believe it's different from actual breastfeeding. And also there are shilas around expressing milk for the same reason, essentially squeezing out milk, even though it's not exactly the same, but it comes under this heading. But you're right. The issue of milking cows is not. So here's a classic example of Shabbos. You can't say that you can't milk your cow on Shabbos because you'll lose a day's milk. That's the price of keeping Shabbos. What you can say is that there's pain to the animal from not being milked. So you have to find ways to do it. Sorry? Yes, no, I don't think the farmer does it. I think they have a machine. So I think the way they do it in Israel is, first of all, they have automatic milking machines anyway. Don't know exactly how it works, but the cow goes up to the machine and it basically, robotics, all very clever, clips on and milks it. If you're on a small farm with one cow, you don't have that. But I believe that if you do have to milk it on Shabbos, firstly, you probably try to find a non-Jew to do it. And secondly, you can't then use the milk. The milk has to go to waste because it was milked on Shabbos, which is obviously a shame, but that's life. So it's a complex subject. If you happen to have a cow, we can look into the exact halacha. So it's something to be aware of. Milking on Shabbos. It's a problem of threshing as well. Nowadays you can buy supervised milk most places, or you can get it flown in or whatever. That wasn't always the case. And there are many stories of people who went to places that were particular to get Chalav Yisrael milk, that went down to local farm and sat and did their own milking, basically. Obviously, they didn't do it on Shabbos. I know a guy who, actually the husband of the person that made the kids' bar mitzvah cakes, one second, called Joe K, a guy called Greg K. He used to walk Shabbos morning from Boreham Wood at 5 a.m. to somewhere in Hertfordshire to supervise the milking on one of the farms. So I'm guessing that they must have not used the milk in actual commercial sale, but it had to be done for the health of the animals. Iris?
Yes?
Oh, you just waving. I thought you asked you a question.
No?
Oh, you're just waving, right. You look like you were putting your hand up.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
I waved at Jeff and Brenda.
All right, okay. You know, if you go to an auction, you can end up buying something that way.
I don't go to auctions.
Right. You scratch your nose, you've spent £1 million or something. So, as is often the case with halacha, here we are talking about agriculture because, of course, the original paradigm of a lot of these things was an agricultural economy. And now we sort of scratch our heads and think, I don't know, who milks cows? Well, kibbutzim do it, right? So if you're a religious kibbutz, these questions become very, very relevant, as do questions around terumah and the various tithes and the shemitah, which is coming up, I think, next year. These all become highly relevant in the agricultural economy. Type of economy most of us live in, where people are lawyers and doctors and accountants and hairdressers and rabbis and I don't know what everyone else does, and building managers and what have you, property developers. We're a bit perplexed by all of this because it doesn't really touch our lives. But of course, used to be that we're involved in agriculture, and in certain societies that is still the case. Like I said, on kibbutzim and moshavim, they have to apply these laws. When you learn in brachas, the Mishnah about, somebody who's up a tree and saying Shema and davening, you think, who goes up a tree at 5 a.m? Well, I don't know. If you're on a kibbutz and you have to pick bananas, I suppose you do. So these things do come up. Okay, what about make a snowman? Are you allowed to put snow together or ice? So some say yes and some say no. Some say it's very much like squeezing because it's basically...
Isn't it building as well?
Well, I don't know if you're building anything really. Well, if you make a snowball, I don't think that's the issue.
You say you build a snowman.
It's temporary. Does that count?
No, there's a few issues. Probably not, because you don't intend it to be temporary. Well, if you throw a snowball at someone, I suppose. There are a few potential issues. One potential issue is the squeezing. Another potential issue, which is an interesting area, is what's called noilad. It's not one of the, or molid. It's not one of the 39 malachas, but molid or nolad is something that comes into being that wasn't there previously on Shabbos. The classic example that's given is an egg that was laid on Shabbat or Yom Tov. Are you allowed to use it, or do you have to wait till after Shabbos? Because it came into being on Shabbos, it wasn't there before. When the fax machine was invented, this was the original discussion about faxes, right? 1 minute your machine's empty, the next minute there's a piece of paper in there with some text. Is that something that came into being on Shabbos that you're not? There is a rule that you're not supposed to use. So ice is an interesting one. Things changing state also is a big topic, but there are those who say that the issue with ice generally, and this could also apply if you put ice in a cup and just leave it to melt, is that the water is almost like a new thing, because the water wasn't there before, it was in the ice, and suddenly the water's come out. So bottom line is, I don't think you can do snow sculptures or things like that on Shabbos for various possible reasons. But
And you put ice in the glass to drink.
Yes, you can do that, because interestingly, even if you say there's an issue with the water, the ice being converted to water, which previously didn't exist, changing state, when you put it in a glass, of course, any water that comes out of it is basically immediately swallowed up by whatever's in there. If you take a glass of apple juice, the truth is, if you put ice in apple juice and you leave it long enough, it does taste slightly watery. Right. People forget this. When you get a fizzy drink, I don't know if anyone's noticed this, when you put ice in a fizzy drink, it kind of slightly kills the bubbles in there, because you're adding water essentially. Like, you wouldn't add water to lemonade; it tastes horrible. So people forget that when you go to the cinema or whatever, and you get a big cup with loads of crushed ice in. By the time it starts to melt, it tastes very flat. But anyway, in essence, any water that drips out of the ice. But I do remember when I was in New York, there were people that would make a point. They would put their ice straight in the drink. They wouldn't leave it on its own. So these are the things to be aware of. So making snowmen. Now, we have said previously, it's an interesting topic. My kids sometimes, one of the kids will do something on Shabbos they shouldn't do, and the other kids will say, oh, you have to tell them you can't do it. And some would say, look, you have to know your audience. And, if a 3-year-old on Shabbos is playing in the snow, I don't know that you have to, I saw somewhere someone said that they told their kid that because they're misbehaving, they're grounded for a week, and the kid looks at them and says, we're in lockdown anyway. But I don't know if you have to punish somebody over that. But it's something to be aware of. It's preferable not to do it. So adults certainly probably shouldn't be making snowmen and things like that. And generally you have to be careful with ice and things like that, or frozen things, because of the liquid, that it might be like squeezing also, right? Even though it's not, it's changing state. So one has to be careful with that as well. Okay, if you've got butter or something, it could be a question with spreading butter. You have to be careful how, if you've got very hard butter and you sort of press it hard with a knife, you might squeeze out some liquid from it. So these are all things to be aware of. We don't look for extreme situations. So, if you literally, you know, if your butter was soft and there's no reason to think that your spreading is going to squeeze it, then you're allowed to do it. And the fact that there might be, you know, a tiny drop of liquid is not necessarily a problem. We had a salad over Shabbos, I had some liquid in. I thought very cleverly poured the liquid away, thinking it was from the feta cheese or whatever, and Bim said, no, it was the dressing. So that's what you get for not spending enough time in the kitchen. But these are all things to be aware of. So if you had, we said previously, if you had vegetables and you have liquid that comes off, and you have to be careful. Morning, Lawrence. Oh, he's gone. Okay, he was here. We're going to pause in a couple of minutes. Just a couple of more things quickly with regards to this. Can you make ice on Shabbos? Right, just by the way. Don't know what the issue would be.
Is it because you would be preparing for after
Right,
Shabbos?
good question. So what happens,
that's an issue.
obviously, okay, so it depends how quickly your ice is going to, in the old days, it took about 24 hours. Now freezers are faster, and you could, you know, it can be pretty much frozen within, what, 6 hours, something like that. So yeah, you can probably do it. Yeah.
Aren't you changing a liquid into solid?
Good question. So is that a problem? We're going to look at that. That's a separate question, which we will look at.
Well, you said about changing a solid into a liquid.
Yes. So the
So
problem,
surely it works
yes.
the other way
So we-
round as well.
Right, so we said that there are some that say that's an issue. For some reason, it seems people are more concerned with liquids coming out of solids than the other way around, maybe because of the squeezing issue. Right, when you put ice in the freezer to freeze, you don't have the squeezing issue. In general, just with regard to freezing, by the way, something to think about, and changing state. So if, for example, Friday night, I don't know, you finished your soup, and you've got quite a lot left in the pot, and you're concerned, right, ideally you should put it in the freezer after Shabbos, especially since if you freeze it now, you're basically preparing for after Shabbos. You're not doing it for now. However, if you're concerned that something's going to go to waste or spoil, then you could definitely put it in the freezer. So no one says you can't put ice cream back in the freezer. Right, if you have ice cream for Shabbos lunch and you put it back in the freezer, wait a minute, the only reason you're putting it back in the freezer is so it doesn't melt, but that's fine, to avoid spoilage, okay? But I'm not sure, certainly after Shabbos lunch, let's say, 7 o'clock, say you have a long lunch and you finish, or after Suda, let's say you have Suda at 7 o'clock, you finish at 8 o'clock and you've got some, I don't know, you serve cold meat and kugel and you've got some left. You don't have to put it in the freezer at 8 p.m. You could wait till Shabbos goes out. So aside from other issues, got the issue of preparing for after Shabbos, right? Simply taking things out of the freezer. You can't take something out to defrost on Shabbos morning for Saturday night, simply because you're preparing for after Shabbos. Aside from any other issues, just something to be mindful of generally. Okay, so if you wouldn't look, you're saying things, putting things in the fridge, right? If after Shabbos lunch you didn't put stuff back in the fridge, it would spoil, even though you're not going to use it again. So no one says you have to leave it out. Put it in the fridge to avoid spoiling. You can freeze something to avoid spoiling. What you couldn't really do, ideally, is to freeze something Friday night or Shabbos morning for Sunday or Monday, when you could just as easily do it after Shabbos. So you have to be a little bit honest about these things. The whole issue of preparing cuts across all malachas. You can have an act which is not a malacha in any way, shape or form, but because you're preparing for after Shabbos, you shouldn't do it also, right? You shouldn't say to people in shul that, oh, would you like to come around for dinner tonight? Okay, great. Come round at 11 o'clock after Shabbos, because you're preparing for after Shabbos, even though there's no prohibition of discussing times with people, right? It's one that we all find hard to do, because you see people on Shabbos and the natural, well, please God, we should see people on Shabbos soon. And the natural temptation is to say, oh, can I meet you at 10 o'clock tomorrow? What time is Noah having his lesson tomorrow? Or what time is the shiur tomorrow? Any of these things. So there is a bit of a dispensation where there's a mitzvah involved for preparing for a mitzvah for after Shabbos. If our conversation is about what time we're learning, or what time we're davening, or what time Julian's going to pick up Howard to go to the minyan to make sure we have a minyan, then there's a bit more of a dispensation. But in general, we're careful. So one of the issues with freezing and unfreezing things, defrosting things, besides for anything else, is the issue of preparing for after Shabbos. Okay, we're going to pause there for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to check my presentation.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
what was
Hi.
the word that you said, something that came into being on Shabbat?
Right,
What,
molid or nolad, like to be born.
missed that. I missed that.
Molid or nolad, N-O-L-A-D. Well, it's Hebrew. Molid. It's like the word yeled or yalda, which means to give birth. So it's something that's come into being, something that's born, something that's new. Some people say that's a problem with electricity, by the way, because it sort of comes out of nowhere. Magic. There are other issues with that. The fax machine was the classic
The new
example.
moon.
Yeah, the molad, right. Same thing, the birth of the moon. Absolutely. Leida. Shaya, May Leida, right? 9 of the months of childbirth. I think I may have mentioned before. I never saw it again. I wish I'd kept it. There was an old Haggadah. It was like not Hertz, but it was something along those lines. Sonsino or something, I don't know, a very English one. And they obviously felt that the 9 months of pregnancy in Echad Miyodea would offend the delicate young minds reading this Haggadah. So it said, 10 of the 10 commandments, 9 are the Jewish festivals. And then it had a footnote, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Chanukah, Purim, Lag BaOmer, and Yom HaShoah, or something like that. And it's the only time I've ever seen this. Absolutely hilarious, because they couldn't bring themselves to say 9 of the months of childbirth. But Leida is the word there, yeah. Okay, we're going to pause for just a minute or two. I'm going to go put my kettle on quickly. I'll leave everything open, and we'll be back for some Parsha in about 2 minutes. If you saw my spoiler, today we're going to talk about Mr. Spock. For any Star Trek fans,
I know that one.
Right, don't spoil it yet. Don't spoil it yet. Don't spoil it yet. Okay, back in a minute.
Julian.
Yeah,
He's just going to put the kettle on.
that's all right. That's all right. Go on then.
It'll suit you wearing the kettle. Did you get my email?
Yes.
Good.
I wasn't certain whether it
Wasn't
went
certain
Can you let me know
whether
what
it
the
went
link is,
through.
please, Jeff? Sorry?
I wasn't certain whether it went through, so.
Yeah. No, I got the email after I got the WhatsApp.
Oh, that was
okay.
probably why.
Yeah.
Yes, it was
But
on the
if-
queue. Maybe it queued up.
Yeah,
There's so many emails.
yeah, my emails come through in bursts. But if you let me know the link, then I'll put that in.
Oh, okay. It's the Shaw's
The
link.
shawl link.
It's the Shaw's.
What, Rabbi Wallenberg's one?
Yeah.
Yes, the one you're on now.
With the same password?
Yes, the
Yeah.
one you're on now.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, fine.
yes, yes.
All right.
Tell
Okay.
me something, Julian. But when we get the Shaw letter and it says that, can you press the link from the Shaw letter to get on?
What shawl letter's that?
The Shaw newsletter that comes through. You know
I
what
don't know.
Lynn sends out every Friday morning?
Yeah, but Brenda,
Can you press
yes,
the link on that?
yeah, you can. It works. Yes, Brenda.
It does.
It does work. It
So-
does
so-
work.
I tell you why, because Ronnie Kemp has rang up and he wants to, they're not very good with computers. So if I tell him to press that on the Shaw
Link.
newsletter, he should be able to get on.